Bismillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers, dear listeners. Welcome once again to the Scholar and the Student podcast, Botswana's first ever Muslim podcast. As always, we have a very special episode for you. Let me just bring up our esteemed guest here with his profile picture. Look at that, mashallah. So, brothers, sisters, dear listeners, for those of you who are not in the know, this is our brother from the UK. His name is James Hodkinson, and he is an academic and a musician, currently teaching, if you want to use that word, at Warwick University. And I'll let him praise himself more because I don't think I can do it justice myself. But let me just bring him up next to me. Brother James Hodkinson, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Botswana. I know you're in the UK, but welcome to Botswana regardless.
Wa alaikum salam, brother. Thank you very much for having me. It's good to be here.
Oh, excellent. It's good to have you on because I've been following you for quite a while. Our viewers, our listeners may be familiar with Aerosol Ali. And Aerosol Ali, because I talked about him in one of my podcast episodes, he actually came all the way here to Gaborone, our capital city of Botswana. And he is quite well acquainted, and that's putting it very mildly, with Brother James, who is in front of us today. So I'll let Brother James talk about himself more and talk about how Aerosol Ali falls into this whole puzzle and what exactly his role was. And just so you know, I know some of you are very confused, but yes, Brother James Hodkinson, that is his name, is a Muslim. He is one of us. He is our brother in faith. But without any further ado, because he's definitely more educated than I am, being a university professor and all that, and he's a musician as well, we'll let him take it away. So, Brother James, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, brother. Quite a few balls have been thrown in the air there, so I'm not entirely sure where to start. But you spoke about a little bit of confusion there regarding me and possibly my faith and my belongings to your faith. I think one of the things, some of the expectations that many Muslims have is that they will be from a certain ethnic background. Of course, we know about converts or reverts, as they're often called. But even then, they will often take on an Arabic name. When I took Shahada about just over a year ago now, I was told, and I did a bit of research, that I didn't need to change my name as long as my name was not a haram name. And as far as I know, my name, James, is the same name as Jacob or Yaqub. So I thought to myself, well, what do I do? And I have an established name as both a musician and a scholar. And I thought to myself, well, I'm perfectly comfortable with my faith without necessarily changing my name. One of the things that many of my Muslim friends around me told me at the time was, look, for you, accepting Islam is not going to be about changing the person you are. It's going to be about consolidating the person you've become. So you don't have to suddenly start to wear a thobe in the street. You don't have to, pretend to be Asian or Arabic or African. You're a UK English guy and your name's James. You just happen to be Muslim. So I kind of took them at their word, and here I am. And I look like this and I sound like this and this is my name, but I'm Muslim nonetheless. So so you spoke also about my life as an academic. Well, believe it or not, probably most of my life I've spent studying Germany as a country and the German language and the history and culture of that place. And during my studies in the middle of the 1990s, because I'm possibly a little older than some of the people you have here on your show. I don't know what the average age profile is, but I'm in my mid-40s now.
Mashallah.
But back in the mid-90s, I spent a year studying in Germany, in Hamburg, in the north. And whilst I was there, I ended up staying in quite inexpensive accommodation. When all my friends told me, I told my friends where I was staying, they all said, "Oh, it's a ghetto. Don't stay there. It's full of Turkish people and Afghan people. You don't want to live there." And I thought, well, it's not a problem. So I stayed there, and one night I was walking home from, I think, the movies or something, and I was attacked. I was physically beaten. I was about 21 years old by a group of guys who were, I think, mainly Turkish, and I ended up in hospital with a concussion. And I guess in many ways I was just the wrong place at the wrong time. But I realized that the relationship I had with this other place, this in Germany was not just with Germans called Johannes and Jürgen and Günther. It was actually with Azim and Ahmed and these people as well. They were part of this country, and this other culture had kind of grabbed me physically and slapped me around and said, look, we're here as well. And so it became a research interest of mine when I went home to finish my studies, and I ended up writing a PhD about the history of Muslim communities in Germany. I actually got to know the guys later on. When I went back to Germany, I met one of the guys who attacked me. He'd actually gone to prison later, and then he'd come out, he'd reformed, and he'd become a social worker in Hamburg. And so, mashallah, we have an ongoing relationship there. And really, it shaped my academic life. Now, the third thing I would say is that as an academic, one of the things that we do increasingly, we're compelled to do it, but we do it as well because we believe in it, is we find ways of communicating our knowledge and our research to not just to students, not just to the campus of the university or to other academics, but to the public, through documentary films, but also through projects, outreach work, as we call it. And as I was looking for ways to communicate my knowledge and my research to the UK, maybe saying, exploring ideas like, is Islam in Germany different to Islam in the UK or elsewhere? And if so, what are the differences and what insights can we gain from studying this? A friend that I was working with said, you should come and work with this organization called Soul City Arts, who are based in Birmingham, in the center of England, with a very strong, large Muslim population, Pakistani, Bengali largely, but also Somali, Eritrean, so quite a diverse community, but big Bengali community. And of course, I agreed, and I went to meet the lead artist, who happened to be a British Bengali artist called Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali is the aforementioned Aerosol Ali. And at first took a while, we got on very well, but it took a while for us to understand how our work was going to connect. And eventually, it came to connect because, my studies had shown me that for all of the mutual misunderstanding between Muslims and non-Muslims in the history of Germany, there were also histories of dialogue and understanding and mutual empathy, so kind of understanding of each other, which had occurred between Muslims and non-Muslims when they'd encountered each other. And I said, look, maybe this is the model we can work with. And so we started a 2-year arts project, which involved spoken word artists, painters, filmmakers, schools, a whole very broad cross-section of society, but with arts as the medium of delivery and the focus of delivery. And I was not so much involved as a musician, more about that later, but I was involved more as an academic, so feeding the ideas that could stimulate the art. And then the arts went into schools, into galleries, but also into urban spaces, because Mohammed is, as you know, originally by trade a graffiti artist, but he continues to try to engage with people and put art in cities, in places you wouldn't normally expect to find it. And so we finally did our project called The Art of Empathy, which happened a couple of years ago. And it was actually in a parking lot, believe it or not. So people were coming home from work, and they came back to their cars to drive home, and they saw this group of Muslims and non-Muslims meeting together in this collaborative project, and came over to ask us what it was about. We explained it to them, and they ended up sitting with us and eating food and talking, and the event went on for 2 hours. And we recorded people's views and so on and so forth. But it was a great success for me. I wrote a case study on it, and I published it. But really, I think probably the most meaningful thing to come out of it was not just a tick in the box for my academic career or some funding for Muhammad. It was the beginning of a working relationship and a friendship, which continues now to this day. And after this long, deep exchange that we had, it transpired that I'd fasted Ramadan with these people because it was I was working alongside them, and they said, why didn't you try? So I tried. I was hanging out with them most of the time, and I was eating halal. Very often they said, hey, it's Friday afternoon. Let's go pray Jummah. Why don't you just come, James? You can sit at the back and watch. Find out what it's all about. And slowly, one thing after another, one day Muhammad just tapped me on the shoulder and said, bro, really, you might not realize it, but you're basically Muslim. And it was just one more step to actually to speak Shahada, really. 3 times, as you do, in front of a sheikh, and actually went up to the hometown of Liverpool, where I'm from. My mother had raised me in the Unitarian faith, which is a branch of Christianity. For those who don't know, it's a branch of Christianity which venerates Jesus, but does not think of Jesus as the Son of God. So sees Jesus as more like a prophet-like figure. So when I was explaining to my mother, who's now a bit older, look, don't worry, Mum, actually it's the same God. We believe the same thing, very similar. We have this notion of in Unitarianism, unity, the unity of God. Well, Muslims will be listening thinking, this sounds familiar, this is Tawhid, right? This is the oneness of God. And so for me, theologically, it was not such a big leap. And so I met a fantastic sheikh in Liverpool called Sheikh Ibrahim Oseefi. You can Google him. He's a Liverpudlian guy of I think Nigerian origin, but he's does a lot of work in the Muslim community in Liverpool. And I just Mohammed and said, look, I have this guy, come and listen to him say Ashahadu 3 times and let's help him become a Muslim. So I did. And then the very next day, I happened to be going with my family to Australia for a year.
Oh, wow.
Because I had a year off work and my wife had a job in Australia for a year. So we found our kids at school. We rented out a house in the UK. We rented out a new house in Melbourne where we arrived. And I looked after my kids and had a bit of time off from my work and spent more time on my music. And whilst I was there, I connected with some of Ali's friends because he has friends in Melbourne. And actually the most immersive part of being Muslim for me was actually my year in Melbourne, where I discovered a small mosque with a largely Somali, but also increasingly mixed congregation, led by a very popular, very charismatic young imam called an Egyptian imam called Sheikh Allah al-Zakum. He was a very good guy, and you can find out about him. He's quite prominent in the state of Victoria. There's a lot of, I would say a lot of public-facing work, which is both dawah, but also kind of communications and mediation with the non-Muslim community and so on. And he kind of took me under his wings. Muhammad set me up with him. And it was a time where I began learning my surahs, began praying and so on. And after that year, unfortunately, COVID hit and the jobs that we had in Australia kind of dried up really. And it was time to come back to real life here in the UK. And I've been back a few weeks now, and here I am in a very different world to the one I left in all kinds of ways. But still Muslim, still artist, still an academic. And that's, I guess, in potted history of who I am and how I became who I am as a Muslim and generally.
Oh, subhanallah. I mean, that is quite the story. I don't know if I could write a better one if you asked me to write a screenplay or something, but mashallah, very, very inspiring in many aspects. But I hope our listeners and viewers won't get any funny ideas, because the Cliff Notes version of what you said is basically you got beaten up and then became Muslim. I guess
this is not generally considered usual dawah practice, right?
No,
try the softer approach first, brothers and sisters.
Absolutely,
really,
absolutely. But yes, it was very inspiring, especially for someone like me who was born and bred in the Muslim faith, and how much I've been practicing is up for debate, of course, throughout the years. But I think we've given people already quite a lot to refute us on, because I've got my hair tied up and you've openly talked about you being a musician and stuff like that. And, it's interesting that, you haven't changed your name or anything. And that's why I said at the beginning that it's confusing. And you talked openly about how you didn't need to compromise your identity and things like this. And we spoke a bit about this in our little session before this actual episode, when we're just getting to know each other, that you have experience with these sorts of people. And when I say these sorts of people, I mean most of the Muslim community in Botswana, for that matter, because most of them are of an Indian Pakistani sort of origin. And these people also exist in the UK. Now, of course, the history of different places, obviously, it shapes people into different types of people. And obviously, the next generation comes and there's a different story going on altogether. But basically, how do you deal with these people, Brother James? They see you as a white Muslim who has been Muslim officially for a year, but you were undercover Muslim for 4 or 5 years, as you mentioned. So Yeah. How do you deal with these types of people and their mindsets which clash with ours?
Well, I mean, firstly, I think it's not quite as simple as a clash. Yeah. So I mean, I for a start, it's multi-generational. So I will meet very pious, quite strict, quite rejecting young people who are quite suspicious, and then very accepting and tolerant, liberal-minded older people. The kind of, like an old Bengali uncle with his good fist-length beard, his neatly trimmed moustache, his hat, his clean prayer robes, walking with sandals. Deliberately taking a long hour to walk to Jummah so his mind is free for prayer and, making his wudu, and this kind of person, very observant and so on. But he will always, very often, these kind of people will come and say, brother, it's wonderful to meet you, and shake your hands, yeah.
Sure.
And on the other side, I'll sometimes meet young people wearing a hoodie, who look kind of young and listen to hip hop music and stuff. And I think, maybe they'll be more accepting. And they're the guys who maybe are a bit suspicious of me. Who's this kind of middle-aged white guy? What's he doing? But they have a kind of almost like a social suspicion about me. Maybe I'm a deep spy embedded like from the British government or someone else, or whatever powers that might be, or Mossad. Maybe I work for Israel or something like that. Who knows what they think? Yeah. So I mean, it's the kind of feelings of embrace and rejection, acceptance, are not necessarily confined to one particular generation or community. Those feelings tend to be more complex. But look, I guess one of the things that I did when I was in Australia is I got involved with an organisation called Benevolence, and you can look them up, Benevolence Australia, and it's a special space for converts. Yeah? And the reason for that is that very often you're not kind of rejected. It's more the fact that you're not included. So, there'll be you go to a Jummah and there'll be a small Somali group who, it's Jummah, afterwards they go outside and they go home and drink tea together, the men, yeah, or some other guys go and get a kebab together and have a post-Jummah lunch or something. And if you don't know anyone, you're sort of looking around thinking, well, I'll just go home then, and maybe the sheikh is nice to you and says, oh, good to see you, brother. But then actually you're not actually part of that, right? And so Benevolence gives you the space to meet other converts who, some of them have changed their names, and some of the women are wearing full niqab, and some are wearing just hijab, some are not even covering their heads. There's a whole kind of complexity of the convert community is reflected in that space. Some of them are in mixed marriages, like I am. Some of them are married a Muslim, and that's why they converted. Some of them just found their way that way, in that direction, you see. So but the thing that's there is that in that space, there are no requirements or preconceptions. There are just people who have come to the faith and their stories, and there's a non-judgmental atmosphere. And that's very important, because that gives you a sense that you have a space to go to, where you can say, you can pray with those people, you can be yourself, you don't have to pretend or try to fit in. But when you have that, you don't feel like, when you don't automatically fit into a particular mosque or community, you don't feel kind of rejected in that way. But sometimes, look, I have had some experiences where there's been a sort of vibe of disapproval. I remember once I was in Jummah, and this guy, I was wearing like a long shirt that covered, just below my waist. So I was completely covered. I was dressed appropriately enough. But some guy pulling back at my shirt, saying, too short, brother.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, look, man, I'm covered. Look, there's a guy over there, like he's showing what we call like in the UK we call it builder's bottom. Yeah. So it's like a guy who's a trades guy who's bending down to drill a hole or something, and you can see you can see things you don't want to see.
Absolutely.
Yeah? And this guy was praying like that, and I'm thinking, why are you not talking to him? Yeah. But why are you talking to me? Is it because you think I need educating or what? So sometimes you get these kind of vibes. But look, I have to say, alhamdulillah, that I don't think I've ever really gotten any kind of negative vibes, particularly about, for example, the issue of me being a musician, right? And the reason for that is, I mean, look, there will be some people who will always see that as haram. They will see it as contradictory to what we're taught. But because I'm also academic, you know, I looked very deeply into the history of Islam, of Islamic philosophy, and before I even made the decision to continue being a musician, for me it was, you know, I told my friends, look, I can't give up who I am simply because, you know, I'm, how can I put it? Simply because I'm changing my religion. I have to be able to keep that somehow. So I did quite a bit of research into all of this, and I came across, believe it or not, a very academic source by a medieval philosopher called Abu Nasr al-Farabi, right? And he wrote a book in, I think, the middle of the early to mid 9th century, which is called Kitab al-Musiqa al-Kabir, yeah, the great book of music.
Wow.
And it draws together an understanding of Islamic music using all kinds of principles. So even Pythagorean mathematics and the understanding of how notes relate to each other. It describes the principles of maqamat, you know, the positioning of notes in Quranic recitation, and relates that to a wider understanding of the fact that music can, instrumental music even, can play a role in helping us to align with the physical order of the world that's created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as a result of this, you can almost be in a kind of quite spiritual communion with that unity simply by the act of creating or appreciating music, right? So, of course, look, there are hadith which talk about us not listening to the prattle of other voices or the whispers of the shaitan, and that music is very often kind of bound up with all of these things. But to those of you who are struggling with that idea, because maybe secretly you listen to music, you know, that there's a very, or maybe secretly you play music and you feel guilty about it. There's a very strong tradition, I know, of really quite fierce, strong Salafi brothers who say, you know, music is haram, you shouldn't listen to it. And they have Tupac in their car, hidden in the side of the car door, and they put on the hip hop when no one's listening. You know?
You naughty,
so isn't it better
naughty,
to try
naughty?
and actually not be hypocritical and actually try and square the circle and think about what it is that is forbidden and what is not forbidden? What is forbidden is when music incites, distracts, or takes us into haram behaviors, takes us into things that we should not be doing. Yeah, I don't even necessarily think of music as necessarily belonging to the realm that we would call maqamat, you know, that which is not recommended, because there are ways of being musical which are spiritually elevating and which are focusing. We're not talking here about interfering with prayer and with recitation. We're not talking about bidr in the sense, but just, you know, being mindful through music, as many therapists tell us today is a good thing to do. There's also a kind of pre-spiritual phase that we can, you know, use to enhance our lives, our mind, and our spiritual well-being. And I don't see that as being contradictory. Look, you have to ask yourself, what is the music and what's it doing? If it's music that is inciting you to do things that you feel you should not be doing, that are contrary to your teachings, then maybe that is the kind of music that you should be avoiding. Or maybe it's the community within which that music is being made that is the problem. Maybe it's the references if there is lyrical content to the music, maybe that's the problem. But if your music has words and the words are promoting ideas of justice and tolerance and reflecting our values, or if the instrumentation of the music is guiding us towards a more spiritually aligned way of being, then I see no contradiction. And for me, I dug very deep into this, and nobody, I have to say, nobody to this day has actually refuted me, called me out, or challenged me on it. But if they do, bro, I've got a lecture ready, as you can hear.
Excellent.
So,
Excellent.
So that's my position on music, really, and that's how I really feel that I can be Muslim and a musician all in one, I guess.
Wow, that's very insightful. Is there any way we can actually view your research? Is it on ResearchGate or academia.edu or something that the common man can access and have a read?
Yeah, I mean, look, you can find me If you just simply Google my name and Warwick University, you'll find my webpage, which has a list of publications, and that links through to all the other places where you can actually download and have a look at some of my academic writing, if that's really interests you that much. And if you actually want to look at the other side of things, if you go to soundcloud.com and put my name in there, you'll find the music as well, which is, my music is generally electronic. I mean, I started making it again with greater intensity during the lockdown period because all I had was my laptop and a small keyboard. And so I think my music's now, I'm very interested in, there's a kind of what's the word? Almost like a stereotype of a white convert who is really interested in Sufism or becomes Sufi, right? Which I'm not in any way, actually. I'm not, but I am quite interested in Sufism. I'm interested in how certain practices of dance and music are used to elevate consciousness to God consciousness, and that interests me. And I'm wondering, despite all the problems associated with drug taking and hedonistic lifestyles that we get with club culture and dance music, there is a kind of breed of dance music coming out called intelligence dance music, which is very much about sort of creating patterns of sound that have a meditative quality that allow us to sort of rise above the physical in the moment. And they're being more often played in galleries or small venues where they're not serving alcohol, or in concert halls and this sort of thing. So they're kind of compatible with our values and our behaviors and our social life in some ways. And so I guess I'm leaning that way. I'm quite interested in the effects that certain kinds of music can have on us physically, on us emotionally, and on us spiritually. And that's what I'm trying to explore with my music. And go and have a look at what I've been doing recently. You might be interested.
Absolutely. We'll keep all those links down below in the description. And if you're listening to this on Spotify or Google Podcast, just check the description as well, and you might be in for a treat. But, James, what do you think about a lot of prominent figures who were musicians at one point in time? For example, you've got the likes of Cat Stevens. He's from the UK as well, doesn't need any introduction. And okay, he's different now, but once upon a time, he also went on the music is haram tangent, and for many years produced nasheeds, which are a cappella for the most part, or occasionally they have a one-sided drum or whatever have you. And not necessarily for me, but maybe as I was born, I got into people like Zayn Pika. I'm sure you've heard of him. Zayn Pika, Dawood Warnsby, and Dawood Warnsby has become a guitarist again after all these years of, well, he was a musician, then he became a nasheed artist, now he's back into music. And it's interesting that he got cancelled somewhat because he went back to music. But what is your opinion about other people who are, I don't want to mention contemporary names because then they might think I'm taking a dig at them, but people who leave the music industry or music in general because, like you said, just because you're listening to music doesn't mean you have to go to a club and get drunk or something. There are halal avenues to explore music and so on and so forth. And you haven't heard this on my podcast yet, but by the time it's released, inshallah, you probably would have. I've had an imam on here, Imam Madhar Mahmood from Canada, and he's from one of these so-called Deobandi institutes, as it labels itself, Zakaria, which is down here in South Africa. And after all these years, he's also gone through an evolutionary stage. I asked him openly when he was on my show that, are you saying music is halal? And he said, yes. And then we went into a discussion about stuff that you already said, like profanity and all that kind of stuff. And it's not necessary to divulge all those details here. But going back to the question, would you encourage people who are musicians to leave the music industry, just like Cat Stevens, Yusuf Islam did once upon a time? Or would you say to them to explore the Mahir Zain route, where they are making music with instruments, at the same time they do produce vocals only, a cappella beats for the people who are not comfortable with music?
Yeah, I mean, that is a useful compromise, I guess. I mean, again, there'll be people who are more, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, more negative way, people who are more literal in their interpretation of what music is in terms of the distinction between the vocal and the instrumental, and the idea that you can actually record and process your voice to make it sound, do all kinds of things. That's something that I would encourage people to explore artistically. even before you start thinking about religion, but from a Muslim perspective, that is a solution. There is a market for it in a practical sense. And for those who are uncomfortable with picking up an instrument because it's deemed to be in some way sensual or sensualizing, then by all means, follow that route. But it's very interesting, isn't it, that all these people like Cat Stevens Yusuf Islam is playing guitar again. Now, it's very solid and pious in his faith. He would not be doing that if he felt that it was a contradiction to his beliefs. And I think probably, he associated that instrument with a time in his life when he was very much into a lot of things which he would no longer wish to pursue or partake in. Drink, drugs, womanizing, all these kinds of things, party lifestyle, playboy lifestyle. And so for him, the guitar was what gave him all of that. But is that about the guitar as a musical instrument, for example? The guitar traveled very much through trade routes and patterns of intellectual exchange all the way and reached its modern iteration in Islamic Spain, right? If you listen to flamenco music, the tonalities of flamenco music, the intervals and the harmonies are the same patterns as Arabic music and the patterns that many of the traditions that Qaris use when they're reciting Quran use. And so it's been a very powerful transmitter of some of our traditional artistic heritage within the Muslim world, So is it really the guitar that's evil, or is it what people did with it? So I would also encourage people, as well as following the vocal a cappella, to also reevaluate what it is they're uncomfortable with, and ask themselves, is it not possible to use many of the tools which we are given for different purposes, to take people to different places, to express yourself in a different way, because in many ways, if you can unify the kind of experience, the kind of transportation that music gives you out of yourself with a spiritual set of ideals, then you're actually, I think, enhancing our spiritual life rather than actually, it's a very fine line, I would admit. It's a very fine line. Even Quran recitation, there is criticism, for example, of reciters who get so lost in the act of reciting, the passion of reciting, in the act of vocalization, that they lose connection with the meaning of the surah that they happen to be reciting. And so even whilst engaged in what is considered our highest art form as Muslims, it's possible to, I suppose, succumb to the sensual and aesthetic aspects of the performance. So I would suggest that it's not while certain forms of music are historically seen to entice us, anything that is of beauty, if it actually takes our attention away for too long from higher purposes, is potentially distracting and dangerous in that sense, and can lead to haram behaviors. So in a way, try to disentangle the idea of instrumental music as being inherently evil and ask, can it do other things? I think someone like Cat Stevens, for example, had a U-turn in his life. He did a 180 flip when he became Muslim, and that's a very common experience. Very often people who have real problems in their lives, and Islam rescues them, and that's, alhamdulillah, that's a great thing. But for me, I was expressed it in terms of, it was like I was driving in the middle lane on the freeway, and actually I just changed lane and went up a gear. So for me, I didn't put on the brakes and turn my car around and do a 180. So I didn't have this experience where I suddenly had the feeling I had to jettison loads of things from my life. I didn't have that experience. I had the experience that, I'm moving on now. I'm moving into a slightly different lane, to a slightly different pathway, but it's still broadly the direction I've been traveling. So I guess I need to think about stopping doing certain things, but alhamdulillah, there were things I wasn't doing anymore really. And to me, when I picked up a guitar, I didn't feel, this is dangerous. this is taking me away from who I am. It felt like a continuation of who I am. Yeah, maybe I just play different songs now. So yeah, but I would encourage people to explore roots and to I guess find ways of doing what they're comfortable with from their own faith position, but also do the research. Think about the broader view of our faith and our massive culture, which goes back over millennia now. There's a golden age of fantastic creativity. If we look back prior to the 10th century, in which there was many musical traditions, many of the most admired scholars of Quran also had plenty to say in praise of music in certain situations. So read that, and you may feel more comfortable also maybe returning to instrumental music with that knowledge.
Wow, very nuanced discussion. And I would just preface it with one statement, which is kind of what you're saying as well. It's that whichever side of the camp you find yourself on, whether you are pro-music or anti-music, it's not productive to point fingers at the other side and say that, hey, these guys are totally stupid or they're definitely going to hell. That's definitely not helping anyone in the long run. Rather, we should look to our own selves and see what it is we're uncomfortable with, why that is so, and at the same time increase our knowledge about our own history as Muslims, Islamic history. As you're mentioning, there's such a long line about a long tradition that we have, long-standing tradition about music and all these things. I just want to ask you a little mini question though, since you did mention Muslim Spain. A lot of you mentioned the word Salafi, so I'm going to use it as well. So if there are any Salafis watching, just point your fingers at him because he started it, right? He's the one who started this game. So
I don't mean it in a judgmental way. It's just a lot of people refer to themselves with that term as well. Yeah. So plenty of my friends are Salafis as well.
I mean, I guess the same is true for me. But anyway, what I was saying is that a lot of these quote-unquote, whether they actually are Salafi scholars, they like to, when they present the image of Muslim Spain, they present, obviously, when it started, it was this great empire, this magnificent light that we all look to with pride because it's our history as Muslims. But then towards the end, because of things such as music, such as the guitar and all this corruption that flooded in, that led spiritually to the downfall of Al-Andalusia. So what is your response to something like that?
I guess at the heart of it is your understanding of what divine ordination is. I mean, if you believe that everything is predetermined, then really it was going to happen anyway. But if you believe, as most people do, that what happens is partly written by God, but also is in some way, at some level, an expression of our free will and of the choices and decisions we make, then yes, you could say that people chose to go down a certain route in Al-Andalus and were punished for it subsequently. But people always tend to judge history and the world from where they are standing and through their own value systems. Yeah, I mean, I think the majority of historians, Muslim and non-Muslim, would say it had something to do with a vengeful Spanish army invading from the north, trying to retake the Iberian Peninsula from an empire which, like all empires, had gone through, had a long time. To use a cricket metaphor, that had a long innings. Yes, those who know cricket. So they'd had a good turn, and like all empires, they wax and they wane, they grow and they fall, and they become, as they grow and as they age, they often become manageable and unsustainable, and for all kinds of infrastructural and social reasons, the so-called Moors, the Muslims of Spain, were conquered and driven out as Spain united its two halves, and what is called in Spanish history the Reconquista, the reconquest of Spain, was completed. But it's interesting, isn't it? Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain, is also held up by non-Muslims or by more liberal Muslims as being that time in history when Christians and Jews and Muslims lived together in harmony. When Muslim cultural hospitality was at its greatest, when Muslim tolerance was at its greatest, right? And very often some of the scholars that you're referring to think that is the reason why they had left the straight and correct path. They were tolerating kuffar, and as a result of it, in their midst, the Christian infidel and the Jewish murderer of Jesus, or whatever their views are, you know, and by befriending them and looking after them instead of cultivating the ummah and only the ummah, they were punished for that reason. So everyone wants to own Muslim Spain and say something about it for their own point of view. And it's a very complex history, and I guess every historian has something of the truth in there. But my reading of that is that it is a shining light, and in many ways it's a period of great history, it's part of the golden age of our heritage, and I praise it for its tolerance and its inclusivity. I think one of the things that some of my Salafi friends will always say is that we look to the Sahaba, we look to the community of the Prophet, we look to the life of the Prophet, and we forget all the scholarship, but it's just, what did the Prophet do? What would the Prophet have done? Let us follow his example directly. Well, the Prophet was the man who, in different times in Makkah and Medina, went out and gave food to people of all communities, who said, be tolerant of them, they are people of the book, right? So that is, for me, one of the most Muslim things to do, is to act like those benevolent rulers of Al-Andalus towards our non-Muslim brothers and sisters in faith. And the idea that this is a simple punishment for having been a good Muslim, to me, that then doesn't tally up, right? So I do have some differences with what some of those scholars have to say on that. And I guess in some ways that comes from the fact that I didn't do this 180 in my life. You know, I lived quite happily. Before becoming Muslim, I lived quite happily, and had all my children were born. I have 3 children. They were born during this period. Great happinesses and blessings of my life happened to me before then. So I wasn't destitute and addicted and impoverished and living in sin, and only becoming Muslim pulled me out of it. For me, it was the kind of tying together of things which I've been looking for. So that was a great experience to have. But I lose myself slightly by going off at a tangent. But yeah, I think for that reason, I don't feel the need to somehow to be very scornful. Some of the most scornful Muslims I know are those who have converted. And in many ways, the things that they say about non-Muslims are so intolerant and so aggressive, largely because, and I don't think it has anything to do with their Islam, I think it has to do with the fact that they hate what they once were. Absolutely. And because they hate what they once were, they cannot bear to see it in others anymore. And they're given a word, kuffar, infidel, whatever you want to call it, and they have to point the finger. To me, that is, that says something about your Islam. For me, sorry, I can't do that, because I don't have that oppositional relationship with my earlier self. I don't have this part of myself that I want to jettison and forget about. It's all part of me, and what I am is what I've become is an expression of the whole journey that I've gone along. So I don't hate my earlier self, and I don't hate my non-Muslim neighbors, brothers and sisters, or family. I have children, right, and a wife who are not, and how can I hate them? So for me, there's a very, very basic level in my life. The family structure that I have is for me a microcosm of what our society should be, and even from a Muslim point of view, it should be able to connect with and accept and live alongside in common cause with those who share our values, even if they do not actually share our faith.
Wow, very, very nuanced, and so many words of wisdom right there. I mean, I don't even know how to start commenting on that. But speaking about family, you mentioned family and how your children were born before you became Muslim, I take it, because from the pictures that you post on social media, and yes, I have been stalking you, so unapologetically. Yeah, it looks like one of them is in high school right now, am I correct?
No, the final year of primary
Okay,
school.
all right.
So
Okay,
kind
all
of
right. Almost.
what we
So
would say
almost.
sixth grade, which is kind of year six, which is sort of age
Yeah.
10, age
Yeah.
10 to 11.
Okay, yeah. So almost there. So I was curious for you being someone who, okay, you are undercover Muslim for X amount of years, but who's been officially Muslim for about 1 year. What's your approach to um Islam and the family? Because you have a daughter as well, and whether you want to phrase it like this or you want to phrase it differently, girls and women have it kind of more difficult than us, shall I say. I was having a discussion with a fellow Muslim man from South Africa in the last episode, MJ Khan, and like me, he's got very long hair. And when we go into the masjid and we've got our hair tied up, sometimes we get those looks because this is something alien to a lot of people. But the fact of the matter is that women will always get that 10 times worse for doing something, well, something else. And then nowadays you've got a lot of prominent people, prominent women celebrities, if we call them, Muslim celebrities, taking off their hijab and all these kinds of things. So these difficult questions about the hijab, modesty, and all these other things. We talked about music already, and I'm sure you've got a good grip on that. But what's your approach to introducing Islam to your wife and to your kids? Is there like a, I don't know, a special study session that you do, or do you like to keep it a bit natural? Like let them ease into it, that this should be a natural way of life for all of us.
Really, I don't think I can ever had a very deep discussion with my wife about it beforehand. I don't think the agreement that I made was that I would not try and force this on anybody. And of course, this is an area where I wouldn't say other Muslims criticize me, but they do ask me, how do you get around this? Because there is an expectation that our children will be raised in this. Well, look, you know, nobody's perfect at what they do. For me, I've spoken to several sheikhs about this, and really what I do is I share knowledge. So when there's an opportunity, to do something and explain why I'm doing it. Yeah. For example, when my kids will want to celebrate Christmas and I don't, and I explain why. I don't take it away from them, but I explain why not, and what I believe. And then I would say, okay, look, I'm going to give some of our money this year in a thing that's called zakat, the end of Ramadan. And this is what I do and why I do it. The kids will say, is it a bit like when we give to charity? And I say, yes, kind of it is. But it's, in actual fact, in Christianity, everybody in the past used to give a tenth of their income to church-approved charities. They were called tithes in England, right? And so it's one of these things, the further you go back, the more our faiths have in common. So it's not completely alien. I explain that to them. And I think really what all my friends who are established Muslims and sheikhs have told me is try to introduce the spirit and enact the spirit of our faith in your family life and show, do not try to rule, right? So I never wanted to be one of these severe fathers with a wagging finger. Look, sometimes I do wag my finger when I say, don't kick the football against the window, please don't do this, or don't sound the horn in the car, please, everyone in the car park's looking at us, please don't do that. Yeah, so I have plenty of things I lecture my children about, but this is not one of them. If they'd been born, that would be in a different discussion to have with my wife. But so because of all of these things, I think in a way they're aged sort of 10, 8, and 5, and to me that's too old to be a born Muslim and too young to accept it with knowledge and understanding. So if I have any hope of being joined in this path by others, it's in a way the best dawah is a soft one to say, look, this is how I live, this is why I live. It doesn't jar with what we've been doing. It's kind of just more me than the old me used to be in many ways. Walk with me and you'll see that our values actually coincide most of the time. And when they're slightly different, I'll explain why, and you can make your own decision. But if I try to take this kind of one-man madrasa approach, harsh, then I won't win anybody over. I don't want to bully people into this. So the best thing is to try and live the example in my experience. But so for that reason, because they're not being forced to be raised in the faith in a way, how do you deal with when my daughter's 15? If she were born and raised Muslim, she'd be thinking about putting on hijab or not, and that sort of thing. what I'd be saying to my daughter, if she chooses, is me explaining our values of modesty and how there may be ways in which she ought to or could pursue that through her own set of values or a set of parallel observances, for example, thinking about, how she engages with the opposite sex, thinking about how she dresses, thinking about where she goes and what she does, and not putting herself in the way of certain behaviors. These are values that many non-Muslim families will also share, let's be clear,
Absolutely.
right? So it's possible to I guess, try and think in non-exclusive terms, that you either do it this way or it's wrong. Yeah, there are ways in which you can actually live up to the values that we are given through our faith without necessarily being part of it. And it's that non-exclusive kind of way of thinking of things, which is how the space I try to hold my family in. And if from that position they then want to one day follow me, then alhamdulillah. And if they don't, I think they can live a good and righteous life without it as well.
Wow, absolutely. I mean, for that last statement, you'll get refuted even more. But what's new? What's new? Oh, what's new? I'm sure you get enough hate as it is, and yeah, we've attracted a lot of flack towards us today. So I think we might end off on this one question that I had about music. Once again. So have you heard of the Mad Mamluks podcast? It's quite prominent.
I have heard of it, but as a guy, I've not actually listened to it.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it's understandable. I mean, okay, I don't agree with everything that they say. They tend to be sometimes a bit red-pilled, if you understand what that means. They're more, politically speaking, they can be more on the conservative, and I mean American, in the UK it means something else, American conservative side. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I understand that puts a lot of people off of them, especially Muslims these days, who, for better or for worse, are accused of being blue-pilled, more towards the left and all that kind of stuff. So the Mad Mamluks, I guess one of their objectives is to kind of balance the discourse, But anyway, what I was getting to is that they had one episode where they invited a brother named Ali Imran. And I don't know how good your Urdu is, so I apologize if I'm using bad words here, especially for some of our listeners and viewers, because I know many of them speak Urdu. So Ali Imran was part of a band. It was America's first Muslim punk rock band called the Kominas. And for those of you who don't speak Urdu, that literally means the bastards. So, yeah, pretty punk rock name for a punk rock band, innit? So, he was talking about how he didn't leave music, because he didn't do the whole thing, I'm breaking my guitars, blah, blah, blah. But he left the band, he left the Kominas, and then he went to study at Zaytuna College, which is a very renowned Islamic seminary, if I can put it that way. So he became an actual scholar of Islam, and Zaytuna College is run by Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, who is one of the prominent scholars of Islam today, if you can put it like that. And he's got some diverse views about music as well. And how Ali Imran was taught by Dr. Farooq Omar Abdullah is that music isn't haram, but haram music is haram. And then the whole discussion about profanity and all that kind of stuff. So Brother Sim, who is one of the hosts of the Mad Mamluks, he's also a musician, he plays guitar, and he's really, really into heavy metal and stuff like that. So he loves his Metallica and his old school AC/DC and that kind of stuff. So I was wondering, do you think that we can actually explore these genres of music? Because usually when we say Islamic music or Muslim music, it's always those Afro beats. I'm not saying that these are bad, or Caribbean beats. They've got some folk music, perhaps. You've got Al Firdaus ensemble from, they do their folk Celtic music, all that fusion kind of stuff. But we don't have the Muslim equivalent, so to speak, of the Sex Pistols or the Clash or Metallica and stuff like that. Do you think it's a worthwhile endeavor to actually explore these things? Obviously, we wouldn't be talking about drugs, sex, and rock and roll. We'd be talking about other stuff. But as far as the sound goes, do you think we should be exploring stuff like this?
Well, kind of. I am very curious about it. When I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I used to listen to heavy guitar music as well. And I played electric guitar. And, Nirvana happened in the early 90s, and I was swept up in all of that. So I had long hair once too. And yeah, I mean, I guess the trouble is that a lot of those, even in non-Muslim circles, a lot of those musics are seen as being socially corrosive in various ways. And, are there recorded satanic messages backwards in the lyrics and this kind of thing? And to what extent are these bands by referring to the darker side of life, going right back to Black Sabbath and early heavy metal? I mean, listen to the name, Black
Yeah.
Sabbath. I
Yeah.
mean, to what kind of way in dabbling in this imagery, which is there on the album sleeves, it's in the lyrics. To what kind of extent are you actually playing with dangerous forces? Well, I think probably you are, and I would tend to. It's not really my taste, and I would tend to stay away from that anyway. But in terms of the sound, you're right. I mean, look, there's a harmonic relationship called the flattened fifth, right? Which I don't know if you've ever come across the flattened fifth. So you play a note and you play 5 notes above it, but take that note down a semitone. And that's very often referred to as the devil's interval, right? It's in a lot of blues music. You can Google it, right? But a lot of heavy metal uses it because you play a chord and then you play the flattened fifth chord above it or below it, and it sounds really evil, right? Or is it evil? We don't know. And is it inherently evil or not? I mean, you also have the whole thing really loud, distorted, and you turn your gain up full on your amplifier and you play the same chords and it sounds really powerful. And you think, yeah, and it's really empowering. But then, is that inherently satanic or antisocial, if it's punk or left-wing or anarchic? You know, is the sound really full of all of these ideas, many of which will be problematic for Muslims who are believing? Again, I don't entirely know, to be honest with you. I think sound is a very, very interesting thing. It's something I'm quite interested in myself at the moment. So I don't yet have an answer. But where sound does not actually attach itself to words, it is potentially quite ambiguous in its meaning. And I guess that's probably what a lot of Muslims are uncomfortable with. It's not the fact that it's inherently evil, but it's the fact that it is not ordered and connected in some way to a prescribed set of meanings that we can recognize. Yeah, sound kind of very often erodes and changes meaning. If I say, if you take, for example, a children's nursery rhyme, sounds very happy, but then you put under it a very low, sinister note, that's a very different effect. Yeah, and very often a horror film will make use of that. So they're taking a sound, and without using any words, you're subverting it. So sound with no words can be very easily twisted around, and it's the slippery nature of sound, which is sometimes quite disconcerting, I think, for people who want clarity and focus and structure and order. But I think as long as you're aware of that, I think we should be asking those questions and exploring what it is we can do. Otherwise, what do? You get a kid who really likes this music and they go and listen to the haram stuff, you know, and they do it secretly. And that's more problematic really than actually having a debate and trying to chisel out a position where there's room for someone to play an electric guitar and be a Muslim, you know. So that's not a fixed answer, but it's I guess a plea for not to be too reductive about these things and to be prepared to explore and keep an open mind, and to be reassured that not everything that we do in the field of the arts and in music is inherently problematic, and that if we keep control and we think carefully about how we're deploying what we do as artists, then a lot of the stuff that people are afraid of, they need not be afraid of, because it's not necessarily going to do the things they think it will.
Wow, excellent. So if there's anybody from the viewers or the listeners who wants to experiment with heavy metal and punk, I guess that's your field to dabble in and maybe write reports on, and maybe you can say that you heard it here first. You got the idea of the first Muslim-friendly punk rock band, or the punk version of, I don't know, The Clash and the Sex Pistols or whatever it was. But yes, James, it's been absolutely amazing having you on here today. Thank you very much. I'm not a very renowned creator myself, but I just asked you and you came on, and for that I am eternally grateful. I don't know when this lockdown will end, but inshallah, if we ever meet, I do owe you a treat, my friend.
Well, very welcome, and thank you for having me. I mean, actually, it's actually been a great opportunity for me to think things through. I mean, I think these thoughts all the time, but having them as kind of in a connected, reflective way, as you've asked me about them, it's given me an opportunity to reflect on them in my own way. So it's been very enjoyable and informative for me as well.
Excellent, excellent. And where
And
can the viewers
where can the
find
viewers
you and the
find
stuff that
you
you do?
and
You
the stuff
mentioned
that you do? You
your
mentioned
university page, you
your
mentioned
university
SoundCloud
page, you
before.
mentioned
Any
SoundCloud
social
before.
media plugs
Any
you want to
social
plug in?
media plugs you want to plug in?
Yeah, I mean, I keep Facebook more for family stuff, but I guess probably Twitter. My handle is at Dr_James_H. So if you can find me there. And really, if you just put my name to Google, you'll probably find most of the stuff there. There's also, if you're interested in actually my journey, then there I have a blog which I don't write on very often, but it's hosted by a platform called Silverback, which are based in America, but it's SILVR, no E, SILVR, silverback.com. / James Hodkinson, and you can find me there. This particular reflection on my connection, the connection I made between my academic work and Islam. So if that interests you, you can go and read about that there.
Excellent, excellent. And do you have any final words for our viewers and listeners, be they Muslim, non-Muslim, or be they pro-music, anti-music, however you want to frame this? Go ahead.
Wow. I guess I would ask people to learn to be comfortable with people who are different to you, even within your own community, and try to get beyond your fear, and try not to be too fixed and reductive in your interpretations of traditions, and recognize that there are different ways of being Muslim. I think that's and that includes being more conservative than me, but in a way, or more traditional than I am, but in a way, it's maybe not me who has the problem with those people, it's maybe those people have the problem with me. It's not an attack against them, but I would say it's always worth doing, because you'll be surprised. It's very enriching.
Absolutely, and it's definitely a call to reflect. I think I might as well just put that Man Mamluk's podcast episode in the description below, because once I listened to that, I listened to someone who was in a punk band, America's first Muslim punk band, and then he went and studied and became a scholar, and he was also going back into music. He never left music properly. When I listened to that podcast and I listened to all the insight that this brother had, it also made me change my own outlook about music and its permissibility and all that kind of stuff. So I guess I'll just add on to what James here said, is that just introspect in yourself. We have all done things in the past that we're not so proud of, but that doesn't mean we have to hate our past selves. And for some of you, your past self might have been a musician who was perhaps doing the other things that are associated with musicians that Brother James, alhamdulillah, was free from, alhamdulillah, which allowed him to find Islam and all that. So you don't want to be part of that old game anymore. That's understandable, but we have to come to terms with our old demons and be able to love ourselves, if I can just, summarize it that way. And let us not point fingers at the other camp, whether it's the anti-music camp or the pro-music camp. Let us keep an open mind, and I always say that during this podcast, keep an open mind and try to get to the heart of the issue and try to unearth wisdom. So, Brother James, thank you once again for coming all the way here to Botswana. I hope that we get to do this more often, and since you are closer to him than me, please do greet Muhammad Ali when you see him, because you're probably going to see him before I do. And I hope he remembers me, because I did send him my podcast as well.
Yeah, I'm going to see him tomorrow, actually, so I will certainly pass that on.
Excellent. And when is Congregate, that's Ali's podcast, by the way, or is whatever you call it, when is that coming back? Is it still on, or?
Well, it was born in the lockdown, in the absence of Jummah, I suppose. It's his and mine, actually, joint idea. And we called it Congregate because we wanted it to fill that space, but we wanted it to be open to non-Muslims as well. And what it does is it frames each week a topic, whether it's a common experience, like how are we feeling in lockdown, or it responds to a burning event, such as the Black Lives Matter explosion, which occurred as a result of the death of George Floyd in the States. And what it does is it brings academics, artists, people from the street, basically a cross-section of society together in digital live stream to talk about these issues, and it gets the artists, whether visual artists, musicians, to respond live, and it creates a kind of immersive environment where art, discussion, and music intermingle, and we come together, hence the name Congregate. It's run for, I think, 2 seasons now, 2 4 or 5 week seasons. It's currently there is more funding there for us to do more, and it's currently being paused because largely we don't really have a sense of where the lockdown is going in the UK. I mean, there are some restrictions coming in certain areas, but there's also a drive to try and reopen places like theatres and public spaces. And so there's a lot of funding in the arts hanging around, which is designed to revitalise live arts, right? And so we're thinking, as many people are, of what the hybrid kind of solutions are for this. Does this mean that we can actually get people in a room together, maybe distanced from each other, the standard 2 meters, less densely packed into a space, but together nonetheless, and maybe bring in a few people through live stream, kind of blending digital and real world? I think that's one of the plans. And so we're actually thinking now how we take Congregate to the new situation we find ourselves in. So we're still, we have lots of themes, we have lots of collaborators waiting to go, whether these will be another raft of episodes as we know them, or whether these will be kind of both in spaces and in space, as in the digital world. That's also a possibility. But, I think this autumn, from a Northern Hemisphere perspective, this autumn, the spring from the Southern African perspective, will show where the path we're going to follow.
Excellent. I'll keep links for Congregate in the description as well. Very insightful conversation, alhamdulillah. A lot less brash than I thought it would be. I thought we would just be insulting people from the other side, but alhamdulillah, he's an academic. He's not a hothead like me. Maybe he was once upon a time, but we'll leave that for another day. So, well, anyway, once again, thank you, Brother James. Jazakallah khairan for coming on and gracing us with your presence. And it is Thursday night or Friday night, if you want to frame it from an Islamic perspective. So the day of Jum'ah is a day that we always send salutations on the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Maybe someone is listening to this on a Thursday night or it's a Friday. So if you are, then do remember to say Sallallahu ala Muhammad. And with that, we will be signing off. Dear viewers, dear listeners, we hope you learned something. Leave a comment below, subscribe to us, leave your refutations below as well. We'll leave James's social handles there so you can refute him at your own will, and he will refute you back because he's an academic. And such is the circle of life. But until next time, from the scholar and the student, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Well, you reached the end. Well done. I guess I'll give you a little bit of a prize by reminding you to like, share and subscribe to our relevant channels. Follow us on all our social media platforms. If you're using Apple Podcasts, do leave us a 5-star rating. And if you think we've earned it, we'd appreciate a one-time donation on Ko-fi or a longer pledge on Patreon. Until next time, stay blessed. Assalamu alaikum.